Hello everyone, and welcome to Fableheim and Iratus, Wrath of the Necromancer. It has been a while since I've gotten to say that, but today I thought that in celebration, I would do something I've gotten a few requests to do, which is go over the Wrath of the Necromancer characters, the Reaper and the Abomination. I may be wondering, what exactly are we celebrating on this bloody day? Well, I'm a bit late, but Wrath of the Necromancer, the DLC for Iratus Lord of the Dead, released 1 year ago on October 26th. So I thought, it's a birthday party. Also, this is coming out the day before Halloween, so you know, Hallows End, birthday party, it all just meshes together for a wonderful day of festivities and reminiscence. Because instead of just going in a hard deep dive of the two characters, I'll go over them briefly and talk about my favorite way to utilize them. We are back on the Eternal Harvest 1 save file. We haven't seen this in quite some time. This run, oh, it was devastating. We utilized the power of the Dark Knight, Mordred. But he's not the highlight for today, although he is important to the power of the Abomination. Good old Stitches. Stitches want to play. Now, the Abomination is a very important character for stress builds. Not every stress build, but back in the good old days, back in my day, stress characters had to lower an enemy's stress to 0 and then hit him a few more times to trigger the heart attack. The Abomination removes that from the equation by means of break and swallow, which is very much like the ghoul's ability to eat enemies. And by very much like, I mean it is exactly that, except with stress instead of health. This allows him to deal 100% stress damage, and if the target's sanity is reduced below 20% by that attack, the Abomination will consume them, and gain a buff restoring 10% vigor until the end of combat. Of course, you cannot eat bosses or inedible enemies such as constructs. Ye swords. Now this is of course his Wrath ability, which means it's unlockable at level 15, so let's talk about his basic abilities and set up the stage for my favorite Abomination build. Now, on the note of constructs, the bastards, the Abomination has a very fun trick you can do if you get a little bit lucky. Now, his basic attack, his Q, as 'twere, is a physical attack. I mean, with all this talk about stress builds, you know, he has a little bit of physical damage. And that is Slice. It deals 35% physical damage 3 times. This number is never going to be impressive, and if someone made it impressive, I would be alarmed. And this is of course, two upgrades like everyone else, but 2 uses. I like to go for the upgrade that gives each attack a 15% chance to stun the target for 1 turn. 15% is low, but you roll the 15% 3 times, which is, you know, sometimes not bad. But the fun trick with this against constructs is to pick up the item, the acidic glands. Unfortunately, I don't have one on this save file or any of my other save files, but what it does is that per hit you have a chance to strip the enemy of all armor and all resistance. The reason this is powerful against constructs is because, well, they don't have sanity, so you cannot stress them to death. So you have to beat through them anyway, and the acidic gland helps remove their defenses in a build that usually cannot remove them. Of course, there is one construct in particular that this doesn't work against, but we try not to think about the justice. For his next ability, it is Hunger. This moves him forward and buffs the Abomination to receive plus 12 attack until the end of combat. Now this is attack, so that will improve his first attack, but I usually upgrade it into Dread Hunger, which changes it from plus 12 attack to plus 16 Dread, which just makes him better at what he already does. Murdering everything. His next ability is Intimidating Roar. The enemies on the chosen position
receiving my personal touch.
I love your personal touch. The enemies on the chosen position and the next position in line switch to random positions. This is incredibly powerful because moving enemies is annoying to them, and I love being annoying. Also, it can interrupt stances, it can break concentrations, it can just do all sorts of wonderful things. That's good. Also, it combos with the Banshee if you feel like doing her little movement trick, which I rarely do because I've killed every Banshee I've ever summoned. Alas. Usually I upgrade this to do some stress damage, just a wee bit. 36 to 40, just a wee bit. That's just because of how powerful good old Stitches is. Yes, you're too good boy. Now, one of his main attractions of the Abomination, besides the whole eating people, is the Battle Thumping. It is a support ability that intimidates all enemies and inspires all allies. All enemies lose 2 initiative, 6 evasion, and 9 accuracy, and all allies receive 2 initiative, 6 evasion, and 9 accuracy. Those are just good numbers. But here is the trick. It ignores Ward, which is very important for the Dark Knight mechanic. Also, it just lets you debuff everything without that pesky Ward getting in the way. Usually upgrade it to improve the efficacy of its friendly buffs, 3 initiative, 9 evasion, and 12 accuracy instead of previously. It's not a huge upgrade, but it goes a long way. Usually, when you apply it to 4 people. You could also go the other direction and increase the deficit, but nah. This also gives plus 6 accuracy, which is a lot of accuracy. So, I like that. Now for his final basic ability, it is Shield. He marks an ally, and all targeting effects on that ally will be redirected to the Abomination. The Abomination will then retaliate physical damage to any enemy that attacks the Abomination. This is very much like the Black Widow's Spiked Cocoon, except it doesn't heal him every turn, and it's okay. It's alright. However, it does give a 5% chance to instantly kill the attacker, if it's not a boss. I do like to go for that one, this upgrade. He also gives 2 luck. The reason why I like to go heavy on luck for the Abomination is because with his Break and Swallow, which I upgrade into Terrify and Swallow, which increases its damage, you deal the damage and then it checks the target's percentage HP after that. So if you can deal a shitload of damage with this ability by making it crit with luck, then you can drop enemies from like 50% health. Just pop them and they instantly die. It's insane, and I love it. So on the note for the build that is my favorite for the Abomination. Oh, before that, I always forget this.
Reinforce the bones, strengthen the flesh, blacken the spirit. Yes.
On top of having an execution, the Abomination also has quite a little bit of sustained damage from his feature. After each action evokes a feeling of terror, dealing 50% stress damage to all enemies. This isn't an amount of damage that you're going to rely upon to do much, but it is just a nice little touch to help slowly, gently edge the enemy towards that 20% health threshold where you can nom them. It's nice. It's nice. Now, for his tricks. Tricksy little hobbitses. As I mentioned, Mordred was the champion of this run, and that is because a very popular build that has always existed is for the Dark Knight to get his stance Futile Hopes upgraded into No Tomorrow. This makes it so that any time an enemy receives a debuff, the Dark Knight deals 75% stress damage to it, which we pumped this as hard as we could. This Mordred decimated everything. So of course, with a team that inflicts curses and a whole bunch of debuffs, the idea was that Mordred goes first, enters his stance, and then, the Wraith, good old Kasogtha. The Wraith is busted. The Wraith with the Ghostly Inferno, the Mummy with the Laser Beam of Doom. I recreated the Mummy because ours unfortunately died in the last fight. Didn't make it. And Stitches with the War March debuff. Even though the debuff does not stack, debuff and buff does not stack, you can just repeat it every turn to trigger the debuff to then trigger the Dark Knight. And as the Dark Knight is chipping away at everyone's sanity with huge chunks, every single debuff, once a particular enemy drops in below the death range of the nom, well, Stitches just comes in and cleans it up.
Death predestined. End.
And that execution helps out stress builds immensely. There are a lot of ways you can play with the Abomination, and he is a bit of a tanky boy. He's no bone golem, but I think he can tango in second place for thickness, which makes sense. His unique item helps with that, the Pound of Flesh, which allows him to start with 1 charge of Break and Swallow at the beginning of combat, much like the Ghoul's item, which lets her start with 1 stack of Lunch Break. It is worth mentioning I do like this one, but it's worth mentioning this is one charge of Break and Swallow, so it will always give you a charge of the default setting of 10% Vigor. There is an upgrade if you choose to go for it, Break and Decimate, which makes it so your stack is 15% Vigor until the end of combat instead of 10, but like I said, I prefer the damage. I vastly prefer the damage. I think that he added a very important element to the stress builds that did not exist previously with the execution. Of course, there was always the shade shenanigans, but those grew tiring, you know? And of course, it wasn't a pure stress execution. But on the notes of execution, the Abomination is a good boy. Almost best boy, but the werewolf has taken that slot. A good boy that adds a lot to any stress build. But there is one champion of execution who has claimed the throne and cannot be contested. And that is the Reaper. Oh, the Reaper. I think the Reaper is the most powerful character to ever grace the Dark Lord of Necromancy. And that's kind of just because he does everything. I mean, he can't heal, but he has unbelievable amounts of damage. He can do stress damage, he can do health damage. He has so much block and ward he can get. He can get armor and resilience out the yazoo. It's a lot. So let's begin with one of the things that make him a very good early character, his feature. And because I'm going to forget if I don't do it first. When killing an enemy, the Reaper restores 10% vigor to itself and all minions. Does not trigger when killing some enemies. This helps tremendously in the early game, especially on higher difficulties where you're scraping by for every single part and you don't want to heal yourself using alchemy. This is great. Fantastic. Now, as for why he is the king of executions, it comes down to his ultimate, and what ultimately leads into my favorite build for him. That is the Scythe of Death. For each 1% vigor and sanity that the target is missing, inflict physical damage. Maximum physical damage for 100% vigor and 100% sanity missing is equal to 800%. Does not miss. Oh. I'm getting excited just thinking about it. So the Scythe, which I always upgrade into the Scythe of Oblivion, which just raises the damage threshold from 800% to 1000%. It works in stress builds, it works in physical builds, and it works in hybrid builds, which is what some of my later Eternal Harvest victories came down to. But there is a fun little trick with this, with one of the most powerful spells in the game as well. But we'll get to that once we go over the rest of his abilities. As for his basic abilities, the first is Dissection. This is a physical attack that moves him forward 2 spaces and he reaps the souls of the living with his scythe. You can either upgrade this to Restore Mana for 25% of damage dealt or Wrath. I prefer the Wrath for 50% because it's a higher number, duh. And it gives 6 accuracy. I hate missing, so accuracy is great. For his next ability, and what I think is his weakest ability, the Spectral Wave. This deals magical damage to all enemies for 50% attack. You can upgrade this in 2 directions. What I prefer usually to do is to go down the improved magic damage tree, which also gives you +1 attack, which makes your scythe stronger. Or you can switch this into a curse damage. I usually don't lean too heavily into curse reapers, but they can work. Well, stress reapers, excuse me, a curse is a debuff. They can work. I've done it before. It's not bad. It's not bad. And on the note of dual damage channel,
Only I know how to unlock the true potential of necromancy.
I think I'm learning a little bit. One of his strongest abilities is Agony. This is a debuff that is both an ignition and a curse, and it works so well with my favorite playstyle, which is the debuff build. Although that's not what I'll be sharing with you about the Reaper. And just like the Spectral Wave, you can upgrade this either into Agony of Fire to increase its ignition damage for health damage, or you can upgrade it into Agony of Terror to increase its stress damage for stress builds. Like I said, I usually prefer to go Agony of Fire because it increases attack and thus increases the power of the scythe. I hope you're sensing a trend here. And of course, the Reaper is exceptionally good at murdering things, but there is a powerful ability that cannot be discounted, especially on higher difficulties, and that is Drain. This removes all buffs from the target interrupts stances, and does not miss. That sounds good, but I usually upgrade it into Desiccate, which makes it so it also ignores block and ward. So those pesky floor 1, I can't remember what they're called now. They drive me mad though. The Doombringers? Harbingers? The guys that give themselves +1 block and ward and then do damage to everybody? Yeah, this ends their existence, and I love it so very much. There's the other upgrade of Expunge, which forces an insanity check, so it makes it so enemies have to go through the insanity proc. On lower difficulties, this will always make them insane. On higher difficulties, this is a little sketch, because it could trigger inspiration, which of course fully restores their stress bar, and gives them a massive buff, but this could be fun. I guess you could try and do like a vampire thing with this. Definitely on a lower difficulty though. I always go Desiccate. And last but not least, the Reap Power. This is a buff that moves the Reaper back 2 positions and grants Iratus +12 spell power for 4 turns. Reap the Maelstrom is usually how I upgrade this because it gives 6 accuracy again, and it will also restore 10 mana. Mana restoration is very important for my personal favorite build for the Reaper. You could of course also go Endless Power to increase the spell power buff by 6, but the Reaper can generate enough spell power on his own just by existing with his class item, the Hourglass of Doom. Each time Iratus uses an active talent, a spell, the Reaper increases Iratus' spell power by 12 until the end of battle stacks up to 5 times. Now you can do some absolutely ridiculous shenanigans with this by having 4 Reapers, the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse, as the build was lovingly called, and all of their Hourglasses of Doom stack. It's ridiculous how much spell power you can generate with that. But the issue with the Reaper is that even though...
Am I in the mood for terror or lethality today?
¿Por qué no los dos? Even though the Reaper can get a lot of block and ward and a lot of armor, he is not a frontline character in my humble opinion. I don't think he is. He has no natural way to restore his own health, and he's just not the tankiest lad, even though he could be pretty tanky. I usually like to keep him in the 3rd position, because he's not like super squish for a 4th position character, like the Lost Soul, but he's also not brawler material like the Black Widow, you know? But anyway, the Hourglass of Doom is a great ability, and synergizes quite well with the most powerful ability in the game, the Finger of Death. This spell has been good for all of its existence. In fact, it had to be toned down quite a bit, and it was modified, but the modification still is good. And with the Reaper, it has been elevated to another level. This spell, in case you've never seen it, is at the very end of the magic tree, and is usually picked up at the end of the mid-game or so. For 70 mana, the target loses 25%, 5% for bosses, of its maximum vigor and sanity. Of course, that number is increased by spell power, which is what the green numbers are. It removes all buffs from the target, and most importantly, it removes all blocks and wards, and ignores ward. Spell power increases its damage. So the trick then is to open up with the Finger of Death. I have a montage for you. You pop the Finger of Death, and then you immediately Scythe of Oblivion and kill something instantly. It's deleted. It's gone.
Death. This never gets old. Brave are an excellent source of fresh corpses.
And a very important piece of this puzzle to keep the train rolling. Of course, you can do that without any mana restoration. If you do it turn 1, you will have to use alchemy to restore mana, of course. But an important piece of the puzzle is to Scythe of Oblivion, and then have the Essence of Mind on the Reaper. The minion's attacks restore 20% of damage dealt as mana. Because this deals such a massive amount of damage, this can restore pretty much all the mana you just spent on that insane spell, the Finger of Death. Now, there is something I've been thinking about while I was debating on how I want to do this video, and that is that the Hourglass of Doom This increases the damage of the Finger of Death dramatically, to the point that you're dealing like 80% of their health and sanity. Doing that much damage with FOD makes it so that Essence of Mind actually restores less mana. So it might, if you're going to go all in on that, it might behoove you to change the Hourglass of Doom into something else. And that said, the Hourglass of Doom basically makes Fate free, the Initiative buff free, the Dispel free. It is so unbelievably powerful, and I think the Reaper is the best character in the whole game. He can fit in any build, he can make your life better in any run, on any difficulty, in any floor. Oh, he is the creme de la creme of the tools at your fingertips. Have I made it clear that I love this character enough? I don't know. Ah, the good old Reaper. So that is the Reaper and the Abomination, and before we leave, I have one final trick to share with you. Without going too into it, although it's been over a year, so I think the spoilers are pretty much out of the window now. But without going too much into the final boss introduced in Wrath of the Necromancer is your moment of sweet revenge against the heroic bastards that imprisoned you so very long ago. And they actually did a great job with the boss fight, in that it is terrifying and counters pretty much any build you could think of, in some way, shape, or form. They covered all the bases. So, if you are struggling with the final boss, or, just don't feel like giving them a proper fight, which I wouldn't blame you, you can go into the potion selection and craft the Cursed Flame Potion. All enemies lose 5%, bosses 1%, of their maximum vigor and sanity. It requires blood, skull, and weapon, in case you have not yet discovered this potion. Now, like I said, I'm not going to give away the final boss, but in Pokemon how some Pokemon have dual aspects and they have this thing called 4 times weakness? It's like if a Pokemon is grass and whatever else is weak to fire and something hits them with fire, they just die. They're gone. That's what this does. This Cursed Flame Potion is the 4 times weakness of the last boss of the game. So much so that I'd recommend taking a couple of these. And by taking a couple of these, I mean sacrifice your entire hoard of parts to craft legendary versions of the parts, to put them together to craft legendary versions of the potion. Equip your science garb to use 2 of these per turn, take 6 of them with you, and drop them upon the heads of your mortal enemies, disintegrating them into a dust so fine that it is insufficient even to use as a summoning ritual. Break them into dust. Sorry, I got a little carried away there. The last fight's terrifying, and this simplifies the matter. In fact, I've used this on Eternal Harvest 4 and 5, so the highest difficulty of the game it works, which means it'll work on any difficulty. So, like I said, if you're struggling or don't feel like giving them a proper scrap, you can just kill them. It is nice. It does require a lot of parts to make it work, but, by the end of the game, hopefully you have nice repertoire. That's not the word. A nice deposit of parts that you can sacrifice for the greater victory. Now, before we go, before I send you off to celebrate the birthday of Wrath of the Necromancer, and of course Halloween, I have one final thing to share with you. It's not a trick, it's not a secret, not so secret. It is a little bit of a bug. In the current version of the game, which is introduced after the werewolf, the ghoul has an interesting side effect. Each creature, when they are summoned, has their own summoning dialogue, because of course Iratus, the supreme necromancer, must comment on everything. I can relate. And when the ghoul is summoned, sometimes she has the summoning dialogue of the werewolf.
Remember to not drool over their body parts.
There is the werewolf one. As for the other one, I don't know if I'm going to be able to get lucky enough to pop it with my final parts, but let's give it a shot, shall we? Nope. Thankfully, I had a video recording for this. So for the final dialogue that he has. It's not used in any creation currently available. Does it mean that it is an unused dialogue? Was it one that was scrapped for a creature that's already available to us? Or does it mean that there is something yet on the horizon for everyone's favorite Supreme Necromancer? I'll leave it to your imagination. So happy birthday, Wrath of the Necromancer, and a happy Hallow's End to you all. Thanks for watching, and have a great Halloween.
The blade is a deadly weapon when one has an eternity to master it.